Welcome to the Guna Fanzine Arsenal Women podcast. Well, we've had a couple of more quiet weeks of news over the summer, but we are right back into it now because after a 2-2 draw with Manchester City on Sunday that gave us plenty to talk about, Arsenal Women now have a crucial game tomorrow night. If they don't win against BK Hacken, they're out of the Champions League for a second consecutive season. They have it all to do. But they go into the back of it, Daisy, offer a little bit of a confidence booster, I'd say, against Man City, and a game really they had the chances to win. How did you reflect on it?
Yeah, really, really good performance, actually. Obviously, if we reflect back to the midweek game against Hacken, obviously coming out of that game, there was a little bit of, expected negativity, a little bit of, unsure about how we would come up against Manchester City. Obviously, they had a very positive first leg game against Paris FC, but I really think, I think the Emirates definitely helped, but I think we really, performed extremely well under the circumstances of what we were expecting. I thought it was exactly what the game was going to be like, both attacking teams. That does tend to favour Arsenal, as we've mentioned before. Obviously, a little bit different to what we got from Hacken in terms of they set up quite defensively. Manchester City, are clearly going to be a fantastic side. They had their moments, but we did too. And I really did see at times it go into one of the teams and somebody getting a late winner. But I thought it came in spells. We had a lot of the possession, and then they sort of had a majority of it, and we had to sit back and really defend. I thought defensively we were much better, but plenty to dissect from the performance, I'm sure.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I had it down as three one-on-ones that Arsenal missed, and I think if you're not going to put one of them away when you get sort of three clear-cut chances, I mean, Russo's was the obvious one in terms of she really had three options: going to the left or right of the goalie, or squaring across to Rosa. Stina's one in the first half. Well, she had two in the first half, but the one where she rounded Yamashita in goal, I thought lob her and go for the early goal catch right. She came a long way off the line, looked a little bit shaky, the City goalie. But on the other hand, you could say Meadow should have put City in front in the like fifth or sixth minute when Arsenal sort of switched off at the back momentarily. So it's really hard. On another day, one team, could have won it quite comfortably, but both teams missed chances. I felt it was a sort of fun game. Two teams who obviously are early on in their seasons, but have played a little bit of football before. But and it makes me look forward to sort of Arsenal Chelsea at the Emirates in a few more weeks when Arsenal have really got a run of games under their belt, and we're going to start seeing this side click a little bit more. But the football that they did play going forward, they were a little bit more direct. Stina obviously coming in. How do you compare her to Russo? And obviously she's scored these goals against Manchester City, but there's obviously more to her selection than just the fact that she's got a good record against them.
Yeah, I mean, if we were thinking of it in terms of a tactical decision, I think we would have probably seen her come off the bench. The impact that she has against Manchester City in the past, we have seen her being used as a substitute. I wasn't sure that he was going to be brave enough to change the team, but I really respected that. I think what we expect from Stina is something that we was going to test the City defense, especially those runs in behind. We talked about that a lot last season. Not like Russo doesn't do that, but Russo's a lot more involved in the build-up play. Interestingly, though, looking back, there was a lot of times when Stina wasn't in the box, and that was something that shocked me in terms of the way that they set up. She often drifted out wide, and that the interchange ability between the players often meant that Arsenal were again left without a figure in the box. And luckily, we had Frida Manum getting herself in there for the follow-up. But I think that was an interesting choice. Obviously, I expected it to be quite direct, as in Stina was supposed to be in the box and ready for the crosses that were coming in, ready to make the runs in behind the City back line. Obviously, when you're coming up against a tough defence, it's going to be difficult to get chances. And I do think Stina played well, and I also think Marnham brought a lot to that side as well in the position that she was playing.
Yeah, Marnham and Stina, I mean, watching them from the press box, you could sort of see the link up between them. They play very tight to each other, and you could see the constant talking. When Arsenal were without the ball, they almost went into sort of a 4-4-2, where Marnham would really push up alongside Stina, and they'd have a sort of press together or both sit off a bit. And I think Arsenal were really effective in actually their off ball work and sort of, Kim and Cooney Cross really keeping that midfield quiet, and then even Bunny Shaw. There's so much you can praise about Arsenal's defense and goalkeeping for a team that conceded two goals. You can sort of praise every player out there because Katie McCabe, you're in your island top, and that's a little sign of actually she needed that performance. We're going to go into last week's game against Hecken in a bit, but a lot of fans said she's at fault for that goal. She didn't track back. She maybe didn't work hard enough. That's not what we're used to seeing with Katie. Sunday was a typical Katie McCabe display, I think, and she works so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reason we talked about her being, off defensively and conceding that goal was obviously that she pushes so high. It's the attacking intent that we've seen from the fullbacks. It's something that we know that Jonas Eidevall loves to play. And unfortunately, when the way that Hacken were playing, it doesn't benefit her to be out of position.
Mm,
Obviously, that does happen, and I think that did happen at times against Manchester City in terms of the fullbacks in general. It happened to Fox on a couple of occasions when she ventured forward, but it's something that I think they'd obviously looked at following that Hacken game, and then they tried to reflect on that in the way that they performed defensively. Obviously, Bunny Shaw's never going to be easy to cover, but I thought that Kadina did extremely well with that, and it makes it even more difficult, doesn't it, when you've got Miedemar sort of sitting in there as well. They obviously chose to play sort of two strikers,
mm.
whether Miedemar was sitting slightly behind or not. But I think in terms of McCabe, potentially she also looked at that game and thought I'm going to take this Man City game by the scruff of my neck. It's the kind of players that and kind of playing style that we need in that side, and something that obviously she must have thought about a lot following that game against Hacken in midweek.
Yeah, I was surprised by Shaw, and I think Miedemar, we've sort of seen her drop deeper and deeper, sort of in recent seasons. But for me, you look at someone with Bunny Shaw's physicality and her finishing. She scored 21 goals in just 18 games last season in the WSL. That's the sort of player you want in the box and in and around the penalty area. And she almost drops so deep where Kim Little and Kyra Cooney cross. If she's up against them, she's not going to be scoring goals from those positions. And I thought there were mistakes in that Arsenal defense. They're always sort of Kadina and Woburn Moore, you're not guaranteed, 10 out of 10 performances. As good as they are, they can be, especially in the early stages of a game. That's normally when their mistakes are. And obviously, we saw Miedemar, nearly score when I think Kyra gave the ball away. So I just thought Shaw was a little too deep because she's almost come back into space where Park is already, where Miedemar is already. So I was a little surprised by City. And obviously, thinking they'd put five past Paris FC in midweek as well. But obviously they drew 2-2, but it seemed like most of the attacking was coming from Arsenal, except for that sort of 10-minute spell in the second half where Park and Miedemar were getting shots off goal.
Yeah, I think City had a lot of the possession. When we was watching the game from the stadium, it looked like there was a lot of sort of what we can expect from Arsenal, really, when they sort of play it back and try and look for an opportunity to find the space. And you know what City's midfield is like. I think obviously Arsenal have perfected that midfield of Kim Little and Cooney Cross, and they both bring a lot. Again, I thought they were both fantastic. It's not, it's the energy that they bring, and that, Kyra again was going back to sort of win the ball back, and it's something that we've needed it for a long time, I think, especially when, like you say, the defense is not always 100%. Obviously, we was left with the choice of playing Padina and Ruben Moy together because of obviously potentially that would have been different if Williamson was available. But I do think all in all, there was a lot of progress from that Hacken game. Still some slight errors that maybe need to be tweaked going forward. But I'm very intrigued with these big games this season, especially
Mm.
like you say, us coming up against Chelsea. And also I have to mention them, City coming up against Chelsea. Again, that could be a very good game if both teams choose to attack like they have done previously.
Yeah, it was a proper blockbuster to start the season, and Jess Park's goal was simply fantastic. I think
Yeah.
I've sort of had an eye on her for a few years, even when she went on loan to Everton, and she's always sort of scored goals like that. And that's what City can do. Even they have so many threats to hurt you, and in nullifying one or two, then there's just another one that they're going to get goals from different places. Mars was deflected. I felt probably Little and Women Moy should have done better in terms of not allowing her that chance in the first place. But it does strike me, Daisy, that for all of the talk all summer about how Miedemar's going to go and score against Arsenal, it was not an ineffectual performance by her, but there's not been as much talk about her scoring as really we all anticipated. And that probably shows you that actually, Arsenal did play well. There wasn't a Viv-shaped hole in their team, maybe with the exception of the finishing.
Yeah, definitely. And I obviously being at the stadium, I chose the perfect chance to go to the toilet when Viv Miedema scored. So saw
There's
that.
respect for a club legend there,
Yeah, I
right?
saw I saw that from the TV, sort of just outside of where I was sat. But no, I think I completely agree with you there. I think obviously we looked at the reasons that why Miedema left and the way that Arsenal were trying to play. Maybe she wouldn't have fit into that side. Maybe some people will disagree. She got a great reception
Mm.
from most people. From from what I saw. Obviously, some people not always 100% on the same page, but I think there's obviously a reason why City have gone in for a player of, her level. I think Arsenal have sort of addressed that with the signings that have been made. Obviously, you can't necessarily straight away replace a player who's scored so much, but like we've talked about, time and time again, the Miedema that we'd seen previously, obviously that changed over the recent seasons, unfortunately. Not always, in her control, sort of injuries and things like that. But I do think, that's it now as well. Like with the Miedema, she's obviously come back to the Emirates. She's got the standing ovation. Now we can kind of not move on a little bit, but I feel like you know what I mean. We can kind of say that that's happened now, and we can sort of see how both teams progress. That's the thing with having one of these blockbuster games at the start of the season. You kind of get it out of the way as well, so there's not as much pressure on her, I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the fact sort of Gareth Taylor was so open and saying, she's been really nervous all week. I've had conversations with her and it was almost a game that she didn't want to play. And Viv as well, I think she put on Instagram saying it's the most nervous she's felt in a long time for playing a game of football. And, credit to her for playing so well. It was her typical sort of angry goal celebration, obviously the deflection going in. And she did get that great reception. And obviously she deserved it. I like how her and Beth obviously scored, and she said in the mix zone afterwards, "Well, it's a happy household,"
Yeah.
and I think the fact Arsenal men drew the City 2-2 in obviously mad odd circumstances as well. It was just such an incredible sort of spectacle in terms of football and people have criticised it as well, both teams, because we got it this weekend as well. Arsenal men and Leicester, and Arsenal women and Leicester playing on the same weekend, albeit at different venues again this time. But it did feel weird having Arsenal women and then the men almost in some kind of televised double header, because obviously it stopped fans from being able to go to both. But it did make for a real sort of TV spectacle, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, and I do think obviously putting it on just before the game as well, obviously, builds up to that. It's only gonna, I think, increase the sort of engagement. I saw more people talking about it than maybe, the other games in comparison. I think all in all, with it being the first weekend of the WSL, it was apart from that game, it was quite a quiet one in my opinion. I do think compared to recent seasons, potentially it was, apart from that game, it was obviously a little bit quiet, but I am really excited because I think just watching the games in general, it's proving what a competitive league this is going to be this year. We saw Villa. I can't go through this podcast without mentioning that Sabrina D'Angelo nearly scored a
Yeah.
last minute equaliser against Chelsea. But yeah, I think like the games like that, I think you're starting to see the competitiveness. It's coming. Teams like Villa are getting back into it. I am quite nervous for Leicester. Obviously, we'll probably mention that as well. But I think teams are sort of not just letting the bigger teams walk over them anymore. This is going to be a tough year. Obviously, the usual people are going to be chasing the title, but there's going to be some sneaky ones in there that I think this is going to be one of the most competitive league seasons that we've probably had in a very long time, if ever.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I looked at Brighton as well, and there's always similarities to what Brighton men and women have
Yeah,
been doing. You're going to see sort of some of not the bigger teams, but your West Hams, your Evertons, who maybe will pay the price of being a little bit too complacent and not really having that sort of long-term plan in the WSL, and clubs that maybe on the men's side are struggling, and now we're going to start seeing it reflected on the women's side. I think Aurora Galley's done a
yeah.
ACL, that was news this afternoon. So yeah, your Villas, your Brightons, and can teams like Liverpool and Tottenham kick on who've invested well in the transfer window. So it is really interesting. Just finally on this game, I did feel the atmosphere was a little quiet. I think when you go obviously from Meadow Park to the Emirates, we've talked about that as a long-term thing in terms of how it's going to take time to grow. But having directly been at Meadow Park for the sort of Shake It Caldente chants and hearing how loud and incredible that North Bank was, I think going straight from there and then straight to the Emirates, it was a real contrast, and almost not for the want of trying, but it. How difficult did you find it? You were in that sort of atmosphere block, weren't you, behind the goal?
Yeah.
Because they've moved the sort of atmosphere block from behind the dugout to behind the goal. But from what I've been told, a lot of fans who were behind the dugout last year have stayed there. So
Yeah.
there's almost now a bit of a split in where those sort of not ultras are, but your red and white and those different groups. So how did you find that? And would you agree the atmosphere was maybe a little underwhelming?
Unfortunately, yeah, I would agree. I do agree with exactly what you're saying. I've had conversations with people about this. It now feels like we have taken what was the group together in block two, and half have stayed in block two and half have moved to block 10, which obviously, as you can imagine, in a big stadium like the Emirates is difficult. I got there and obviously I was quite like pleasantly surprised that I was around all the people who I obviously like know and know will sing and know will make noise. I will not discredit their endeavours by any means because you know the usual people were on point with their chants and their singing, but obviously I don't want to say this is just me speculating, but there seems to have been some confusion with the block 10 because barring maybe about 20 people in block 10, I couldn't hear anybody else, which is really disappointing because I thought we were going to come in and all be in block 10 together and it was going to be rows and rows of people singing. So I don't know what's happened there. I know obviously a lot of work went into the block 10 trying to create that atmosphere block with the supporters club, so it's definitely not a reflection of that, but it is quite sad to see because obviously I came off that, you know, fantastic game at Meadow Park against Rosenborg and the singing and the banging, it was so loud. It was probably one of the loudest that I've ever,
Yeah.
you know, I've ever heard it. And then getting excited to go to the Emirates, massive game as well. It's not like we're playing sort of one of the lower leagues. We're playing one of the direct rivals in the league, and it was tough. I will say that I am looking forward to tomorrow, and I'm hoping that was just a one-off, and maybe it'll just take time to build up. But it's going to be difficult because you've got to appreciate how big the Emirates is. I know Arsenal are always going to be huge. Their support is going to be huge, but I think you sort of because you see it like at away games and you see it at Boreham Wood, maybe you go into a bit naive thinking there's going to be more people there than there actually is, if that makes sense.
I think as well, almost you get probably a lot of the families and stuff who go to the Emirates
Yeah.
aren't at Boreham Wood every week. And, obviously you have so many more seats, essentially, so many more eyes that can be on the game and voices who can be there. And it almost struck me that a lot of the chants that we did hear were maybe some of the ones that have been around for years, maybe almost before the craze of being in the North Bank and the Meadow Park. And, there's obviously these WhatsApp groups where we see the chants sort of start every week and be created. But a lot of people, maybe aren't at Meadow Park, aren't part of that, go to the Emirates, 5, 6 times a season, hopefully more this season, and are actually just more used to. There's almost we're going to see a real divide maybe between the Emirates and Meadow Park, and it is going to be really hard bridging them together. But there are almost sort of different sections of fans now at both games, and we'll see the same for away games. It's going to be interesting how it develops, but I still think you'd rather have 40,000 in the Emirates, not making loads of noise than 3,000 in the Emirates making absolutely tons. It's still
Yeah.
such a better spectacle. And you look up to Old Trafford where they only had 12,000. There's almost been people who've been disappointed that Arsenal only got 40,000 compared to their sellouts, but it's still a remarkable achievement considering where we were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, you know, it's fantastic what we're doing. I know there's been some arguments that I think maybe we are sort of looking at it too early. Obviously, this is the first game. Let's give it sort of the season and see how it goes. But I know some people are looking at it thinking, should we go for a middle sort of ground stadium? That was obviously in discussion. But you know, the team, we talked about the girls talking about the stadium as well, the whole squad saying how important it is. Just having Manu Zinsberger in front of you, you know, celebrating with you is enough to convince you that you made the right decision to sit behind the goal. I think things like that mean so much to the team and to the fans, and it is worth it just to watch that. I think we should not be sort of disheartened about the 40,000. I'm looking at the Chelsea game, the amount of
Yeah.
people that I know that are already thinking about going to that, you know, it's going to be huge by far, one of the biggest games that we're probably going to play. I'm not saying any more about Champions League because I know I'll just jinx it for tomorrow, but I know that those games are going to be huge, and I'm excited to see how the away support develops. I watched it a lot last season and I was so impressed. I mean, Leicester was a huge one. Like last season, so I'm excited to see that as well. So yeah, I think it's like I say, it's early days into this season, isn't it? We're still developing, and I'm just hoping that other teams can sort of build from this as well, because it is important that it's not just us that are doing it. It is important that it's happening as well. As much as you don't want, you know, the home fans to outsing you, but it should be happen. It shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't be always going to grounds and sort of outsinging
Yeah.
everybody. It'd be nice to see that happening across the board.
Yeah, and I know Arsenal aren't expecting sellouts every week as well. And especially when you look at the Champions League, when you've maybe if we do get through, obviously when you've maybe got a couple of group games, you might have a Leon or Barcelona, God forbid, in your group.
Don't say
But
that.
But then you might have, as we saw a couple of years ago, like an FC Zurich, when only maybe 3 or 4 thousand are going to come down on a cold Wednesday night. So it's more just you have the option, haven't you, of selling out the Emirates. You have the chance of it happening, and almost anything above what you would get at Meadow Park is going to be a victory for Arsenal. And they're still in the long run, they're certainly benefiting financially from it. And there was a study the other week about how the local businesses, the local pubs are all benefiting from it, which I can claim responsibility of alone after the Leicester game in the Tollington. But there's a real uplift, and people know these games are on as well. I got the training from I live 30 miles from London, and I walked up to the onto the platform on Sunday morning, and everyone on there is an Arsenal woman fan. It's amazing. It's so cool to see it. You almost wouldn't know if it's a men's match day or a women's match day now when you're actually in the area around the Emirates, when you see the fans coming through the tunnel in the pubs and after the games. And yeah, it's a really exciting start to the season. And 40,000, I think there's a lot more to come. But from 40,000 to a few hundred, because we saw those loyal Arsenal fans travel out to Gothenburg last week. I think 360 away tickets were sold, but then there were a load of Swedish gooners who travelled from all over Sweden as well. And they made loads of noise. I met up with a few at the pre-match meetup. Our friends from Arsenal Gothenburg, everybody very friendly, and yeah, a really, really good experience. And I know how pleased Arsenal were actually that so many travelled out to support them. Not the result that they were hoping to see, but I know Kim Little, who I spoke to afterwards, and Jonas Eidevall, very keen to stress it's only half time in the tie. But Daisy, they've got to turn it around. There's no way they can be better. Sorry, then they can't be better than last week, because if they were the same as last week, they're not going to go through. They were simply not good enough on Wednesday.
Yeah, and I think there's no sort of naivety. They know that too. I do think obviously, yeah, you have to look at it. This is why when we were doing the draw, I was looking at it like, okay, maybe the home leg being second will actually benefit us. We know what Meadow Park can do. It got us through that Rosenborg game. Yes, we missed chances. We should have scored more. We just can't have a repeat of this. I know we're still having this same problem looking at that Man City game. Could we have won that game? Yes. Could we have won that game if we took our chances? Yes. And could we have beaten Hacken if we took our chances? Absolutely. I think for fans and obviously the team as well, what we don't want to see is a repeat, right? We don't want to see the same thing happening every week and us coming on the podcast and saying we didn't take our chances. You can sort of let them off for the one or two that happen in the game, but when we're creating, I think we were looking at sort of double figures. Like, I don't want to be wrong, but think we were looking at sort of over 15 chances and convert and shots on target were only at about four. So it's very strange when we're looking at like actually converting the chances that we're getting. But if we see the same thing again, unfortunately, Hacken are going to go into that game and ultimately part the bus, right? There's no other choice for them. They're going to try and catch us out when they get the opportunities. And if we continue with these same mistakes defensively and not taking our chances up front, we are going to be punished, and that would be catastrophic if we go out tomorrow.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you think, well, if we can score 2 goals against Manchester City, then we should be able to against Häcken. But what Häcken have done so well is that they've managed to get themselves into a position in the tie where they know Arsenal have to score 2 goals. They know exactly what they need to do. It's very simple for them, unless Arsenal obviously then do get back into the game. And Häcken, I don't think they're a complete sort of parking the bus team in their nature. So this is really going to be a test for them if they actually just say we're going to put everyone back, we're going to barely have any interest up front, because we saw them hit Arsenal on the counter attack last week. We saw them they should have scored 2 goals, if anything, on the counter attack. So I think their style will suit this game for them. And if they maybe do just put some principles aside, I know they were absolutely shattered on Wednesday night. Mac Lynn, their manager, came up the stairs to the press conference and he said, "Oh, that was difficult just getting up the stairs to come and speak to the media," because he himself was so tired. But the way they celebrated their goal, they know they're in a really good position in the tie. And for me, it's either Arsenal win by 3 or 4, or it gets really, really difficult for them. I think if Arsenal have a good night, they will sail through. But the longer that maybe they go on without scoring, the more nervy it's going to get. What's your gut feel ahead of tomorrow?
I I want to be optimistic because I think it's not like we're struggling to create the chances. I think that's something that's that's swaying me towards, I do think this will be difficult. I don't expect this to be a high scorer, but I just think there's more in Arsenal in terms of creating chances and taking those chances than what Hacken can deal with. I think yes, they're going to have to defend. They've got no choice. They've got the advantage. They need to take that. But I am expecting, please don't let me down again, Arsenal. But I am hoping that they will pull out all the stops, try and get those goals. They know what's on the line, right? There isn't another chance this time. Maybe they went into that first tie and yes, it was difficult, but they sort of maybe had that at the back of their mind. I know they won't come out and say that, but they maybe had it at the back of their minds that they had another chance.
Mm.
But I do think it's not going to be easy, but I do expect us to sort of get the goals that we need. I'm not going to go in all confident and say 4-5-0, but I do think we can score at least two. But it is going to get nervy. There's no doubt about that. I do think it will be sort of tight for a long time in the game, and we're going to have to be extremely patient with that one.
Yeah, I was on BBC Radio London last night and I spoke to Emily Herbert on Sunday. She interviewed me for the show and she said if Arsenal don't go through, should Jonas Eidevall be sacked? And the question never aired last night on the radio. They edited it out, so you'll never know what I said back to her. And I would ask you, but I do feel it's unfair because I don't think we'd ask you that if it was half time in a one-legged game. So I
Yeah.
think we just have to wait until after tomorrow night and then see how we go. But it's going to be, quite the fiasco if Arsenal don't get through, especially for a second year in a row. Last year, you can sort of excuse as a one-off, but if it's not to happen tomorrow night, there has to be consequences.
Yeah, this qualifying is always going to be difficult, but it you can't use that as an excuse. Yes, we looked at last season and did have some valid excuses. Obviously, still disappointing the way that we went out. That was a tough side at the time, but I think you can't look at this and use that excuse again. We've had a full pre-season, a lot of players coming back and getting into the squad, a lot of new signings. We're playing good football. This is the thing that's on my mind constantly. We'd be coming into this so much more sort of negative if we were not even creating the chances, which I know we struggled to do at times sort of last season. I think now we're looking at a different scenario. We've got to finish our chances. I'm not going to say definitively either, obviously, because it's not that Man City game changed things, didn't it? Had we lost that game, maybe we'd be looking at this as a bit more of sort of a last chance
Yeah.
kind of thing. But obviously, we got a result there. We played well. Do that again, and we'll be fine. Don't get through, and we'll talk about that next week. Hopefully not, though.
Yeah, we will see. Quickly on team news, Lena Hurtig has returned to training. Steph Catley trained on her own, and Leah Williamson has missed a second game in a row after, concussion that we're told was sustained in training, and now she's kept out by the concussion protocols, which are obviously really strict and rightly so in the modern game. But Jonas Eidevall really didn't want to go into any detail in terms of what training session it happened in, what happened. And Manu Zinsberg was in the press conference and was great fun. You'll like this, Daisy. She mentioned she was asked about Rosa Kafaji, and she said she's always got a ball at her hand. She's a crazy little player, and even when they're in the hotel, she's there kicking a ball around and on the team coach. I've seen videos of her. Someone's tweeted me a video actually of her just getting onto a coach, and she's got a football in her arm. She's really sort of living up to that. I know she's talked about how her sort of inspiration was Ronaldinho, but she is just a kid in the park playing football, isn't she? And we saw glimpses of that on Sunday as well, just finally.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we didn't even obviously get too much into that, but I think coming off the bench, she had a huge impact. She hit the post, which actually came through, I'm sure, was an assist for the Beth Mead goal.
Yeah.
So lots to see from her. Very interested to see what Jonas does. Obviously, Frida Manum had a great game as well. It's such a difficult one when you've got two players, in the same position fighting for it. Could you really drop Frida Manum after that performance? Probably not, but you are looking at a Rosa Kafaji, who again is playing against, I know we saw her in the previous leg, but she's playing at Arsenal's ground against her former club. Interesting as well to see what he does about Russo and Stina, just to mention that. Obviously, team news is hard to predict. Would we sort of see any sort of major changes? Obviously, we don't get much in the back line, I would expect. Obviously, I presume that you're saying Leah is unavailable as well. So that I'd expect that not to change really. But it's interesting to see if he goes, exactly the same team or who might come in and out in that scenario. Will Beth Mead start? He's got such a tough decision to make, and I'm very intrigued to see what he does there. So yeah, that I'm glad that's not my job and that's up to Jonas.
Yeah, well, all or nothing tomorrow night. I don't think it's a sellout yet at Meadow Park. I'm gonna really, really quickly check that now. But Boreham Wood finally, the players, Kim Little told me last night how almost they said in the sorry, last week, how almost they said in the dressing room after the game, actually we're at Meadow Park. We're gonna have the fans behind us, but you can't take that for granted at the same time. But you really feel that is going to hand Arsenal an advantage tomorrow night.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I mentioned, obviously with the previous game, we were extremely loud. We're still building up that atmosphere at the Emirates. I think this everybody knows what's on the line here, right? Like this is huge. We've got the advantage this time that we didn't have last year. We have to go in and get behind them. I don't want the negativity. I think that could only sort of it's not going to do any good going into that, not being positive. We did that against Rosenborg. We got the result that we needed. I think the crowd will be absolutely huge tomorrow, and I'm hoping to contribute to that. And yeah, let's hope we get a Mariona Caldente goal because I'm not sure what would happen
Yes.
if we do because it would go mad, I'm sure.
Well, I've had a look. Tickets still on sale, and I'm sure Hecken will bring a few fans as well. They were very well supported the other night, which was yeah, really good to see. Daisy, we will reconvene next week. I'm at the King Power on Sunday afternoon, Leicester away, which produced one of the most remarkable comebacks I've seen last season when we were 2-0 down at halftime and won it by 6-2. It's the best media food I've had in the country, so I alone can look forward to it for that reason. And I'll hopefully see a few of those Gooners there going up to Leicester. You're at Meadow Park tomorrow night. So is Leif. He'll be covering it for the Gooner, and I'll be sort of adding my input remotely as well. And we are also ever closer to the Arsenal Women fanzine coming out in a couple of weeks' time. So lots to look forward to, but lots to be nervous about, I think, for tomorrow night, Daisy.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we're gonna get through it. Let's cross fingers. Lots of exciting things coming up by the sounds of it. But let's start hopefully with the win against Hacken and yeah, I'm looking forward to all the away days that are coming up soon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully some more getting on planes rather than trains for some of these away trips. Daisy, enjoy tomorrow. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.